The key team and I would like to make sure that every one of our buyers and sellers has had the opportunity to go through the entire contract with us when they write a contract or get a contract. Sometimes that doesn't always work out because of scheduling conflicts, or someone might just be in too much of a hurry and just wanted to get the thing signed. So if we don't have the opportunity to either sit down or call to go through it in person, this video can help to serve to fill that gap. So I'm going to go through this with you, and these are some of the high points that we typically go through a client with. I'm actually going to go a little out of order because I want to emphasize things that tend to become problems later. So I'm going to start with the residential inspection addendum. That seems to be where all of our problems happen in any contract, where a buyer is not clear or a seller is not clear what could come of the inspection addendum. So in this inspection addendum, it says that we'll have an inspection done within a certain amount of time. According to the contract, usually that says 10 business days. After that happens, if there are qualified defects, the buyer can use a repair addendum to ask for any repairs or credit in lieu of repairs, or they could just get out of the contract based on issues that they find. So in bold here, though, it says that it has to be a qualified defect, and there are examples of things that are not qualified defects. So these inspectors are licensed professionals, and they are going to point out everything possible with the house. I don't mean that in a bad way. That's what they're paid to do. You're paying good money for that. But they're going to tell you things that maybe just you need to consider for down the road. Good things to know about the house. That doesn't mean it's a defect. Example is something that's aged beyond its expected useful life. Age is not a defect. So just because a water heater is old and it's not expected to last that long, as long as it's not defective, it cannot be asked for in a repair addendum. Same thing with a roof. It might be old, it might be on its last leg, for example, but if it's not defective, it's not leaking, shingles not falling off, things like that, then it's not defective and it can't be asked for in a repair addendum. Other things like minor wear and tear, scratch and dent, cracked driveway, sidewalks. A house built in the 70s was built to a certain set of building codes. Those building codes have evolved since then, but a seller is not expected to bring the house up to current codes in order to sell the home. So they're going to find things in the inspection report that are not up to current code, but that doesn't make it a defect. An example of that would be knob and tube wiring. An inspector finds knob and tube wiring, and they're going to tell you about the risks of knob and tube wiring. But just having knob and tube wiring does not make it defective. However, if it were done in an unsafe way, like insulation on top of it that could cause a fire hazard, that's different. But just having it alone is not a defect. Other things in this inspection addendum just talks about timeline. Once it's done, when you need to ask for repairs, when the seller needs to respond by. Just know that as a buyer, if you ask for repairs, the seller could just respond by making the contract null and void. Why would they do that? Well, if they have a as-is cash, no appraisal offer as a backup contract, and you might not know that there's a backup contract, they might say, well, you're asking for repairs. I've got a better or an easier contract as a backup. I'm going to declare this contract null and void, and there's nothing you can do about it at that point. As a buyer, if you ask for repairs and the seller says no, or no, but we'll give you credit, or no, but we'll do these repairs instead, any answer but yes to the buyer means the buyer could declare the contract null and void. So very important part of our contract is the inspection addendum, what happens with the inspection. I think it's just important for buyers to understand that you're not buying a brand new home. There are going to be things that the inspector finds. We're just looking for major defects. I love it when a seller's home is pre-inspected so that all of that is found out and known at the time of making an offer, and there are no surprises later. All right, so now I'm going to get to the real estate purchase contract, and I like how this is broken into sections and lines, so I'm going to summarize each section. Section 1 just says who the buyer is, who the seller is, the address, the legal description, parcel ID. Section 2 says the purchase price and the earnest money amount. I'll talk more about earnest money in Section 10. And who will hold the earnest money. Now, an important thing for buyers to understand is that earnest check will be cashed. The earnest check is due by the end of the next business day after the offer is accepted. Earnest money will be cashed and held in escrow by the title company, or in some cases by the real estate firm. Section 3 says the closing date. So the closing date, but it says on or upon mutual agreement before. Plan on the date on this contract, the closing date, settlement date. However, if the buyer's ready early, the seller's ready early, the lender is ready early, then it could be moved early, but it has to be a mutual agreement. If it has to be extended for some reason, then we have to amend the contract to extend it, and that's a whole nother issue that people aren't always willing to do that. Section 4 just says what stays with the contract. Now, I want to emphasize that no matter what it says in the MLS listing, it may say there's a great brand new refrigerator, but if it's not written on the contract in this offer that it stays, then the seller is going to assume that it's not staying. So it needs to be specified what is going to stay. Now, the bullet list here says what stays by default, like things that are attached, and you can read through that. But then we list on lines 36 and 37 additional things that might stay, like refrigerator, washer, dryer, maybe there's bar stools that you want to stay, things like that. That's where we write those in. I like to list things that are excluded in lines 38 and 39. If we know that the seller is not planning to leave the refrigerator, for example, they need to take it with them, then I like to list it there so it's very clear to everybody down the road and there's no confusion in a month after we've gone through inspections and everything, why isn't that refrigerator still here? Section 5 just says that when the buyer will take possession of the property. Most of the time, it's at settlement, on that closing date, the buyer takes possession of the property. Sometimes there are other agreements where the seller can stay later. Very rarely will the seller allow the buyer to move into the house prior to closing. So remember that. Section 6 says whether or not a home warranty is included with this and if the seller is paying for it. So a lot of times buyers do ask for a seller-provided home warranty, and this is where we specify that. Section 7 is additional agreements, and this is important if the seller has disclosed, say, a broken window or something like that, but the buyer would like that to be repaired. This is the place that we put that in at the time of the offer. If they've disclosed an issue, that issue cannot later be asked to be repaired after a home inspector finds that issue. They've disclosed it. We know about it at the time of the offer. So if that's desired to be fixed, that's where we put it in, Section 7 on the offer, not waiting until an inspector calls it out as well. Other things like if we're walking through the house and we see something, we see, say, a piece of flashing hanging off the back of the garage and we want that fixed, there's no reason to wait until the inspector has called that out, kick that can down the road. If we know we're going to want that fixed, we put it in Section 7 up front. No, we don't like surprises. Section 8 says what is included with the contract, meaning what other addendums. So on the left column, these would be the inspection addendums. We would check the boxes for the inspection addendums. On the right column, it would be the property's disclosures that the seller fills out. I won't cover contingency addendums, backup contracts, as is conditions. I'm going to just stick with the typical contracts that we see. Section 9 says that the seller, nothing has changed since the seller filled out their home disclosure report, and that the buyer understands that that does not take the place of a home inspection. Section 10 explains what earnest money is, and that's really to show that the buyer is serious. They're putting some skin in the game. Here is a certain amount of money that will be held by an escrow agent until closing. They lose that if they get cold feet and back out, but they could get out of the contract and get that back, say, if there's some major issues that they can't come to an agreement upon, or the house is damaged between now and closing. So that really explains earnest money. Section 11 says how the buyer intends to pay for the property. If it's cash, if it is cash, is there an appraisal or not? And then if there's financing, what type? And here is also where we would talk about what credit the seller is going to give the buyer at closing. I would say that most of the time there isn't a credit, but some of the times the buyer will ask for the seller to give the buyer a credit for their own closing costs at closing. So if it is a financing contingency, we spell it out here, and then this also says the seller is willing to sign the various FHA amendatory clauses, things that go along with FHA and VA loans when those do come up later. Section 12 says that the seller is going to provide a title insurance policy. This insurance policy makes the buyer understand and be aware that the title company has done a full title search. But if they miss something and a lien comes up later, that title insurance policy will take care of any of those liens. So they're getting clear title and an insurance policy to make sure that it's clear. They're going to get a warranty deed to the property, and they're going to get a credit for prorated property taxes. So the way taxes work in Illinois is you live in the house this year, pay taxes next summer for living in it this year. Well, if a buyer gets a home in the middle of the year, they get a credit from the seller for that amount of time, so that when the bill comes out next summer, they have the money to make that payment. Other things that you get a prorated credit for is when there is propane, you're living in a rural area, the seller gets a prorated credit for any propane that's remaining in the tank at today's market rate, at the most current market rate, right before closing. 13 says they'll do a final walkthrough within 7 business days of closing to make sure nothing has changed. Now, important to note here that the seller isn't obligated to be out and clean until closing day, right at closing time, in fact. So if a final walkthrough happens the day before, the house could be completely full still, and I've seen this, and then buyers freak out. But just know that the seller has until closing time. They're obligated to be out at closing and have it clean, empty and clean. All personal property gone, sellers. All right, unless the buyer and seller has agreed that they maybe want some of these cans of paint left behind. But a lot of times the sellers leave too much stuff behind, and then it creates a problem later. Section 14 says that if there is any material damage by like hail or wind or tornado, anything like that, prior to closing, the buyer can back out and get their earnest money back. And we've seen this happen. A windstorm take a roof out right before closing. However, what they could also do is use the seller's insurance proceeds to make those repairs. And in the example I just spoke about, that is what happened. The buyer continued to buy it and got a new roof out of the deal, which is kind of nice. Section 15 says where the buyer's address and the seller's address and that digital signatures are okay. 16 is an important one. It says that once the contract is signed by both parties, it is a contract. The buyer is obligated to buy, the seller is obligated to sell. No takesies backsies. Can summarize that. Either party could be entitled to legal remedies if the other party does not perform. 17 says that the seller makes no guarantees or representations about the property after closing. You have no idea how long the water heater will last, for example. It could be that there's a warranty involved with this purchase contract, which would have been specified above. 18 and 19 are a bunch of general boilerplate legal stuff, like X is the same as a check mark. Weekends and holidays don't constitute business days. 20 says who the buyer's agent is and who the seller's agent is. And on the last page is where the buyers and sellers both sign. I always like to put a expiration time and date on the contract, because if you don't, this offer really hangs out there forever until it's officially retracted. So just putting a date in there and a time means that at this date and time, the offer becomes null and void. Okay, so that is the contract. We already talked about the inspection addendum. I did that up front. The other inspection addendums that a lot of times come along with the contract are radon inspection addendum and termite inspection addendum. Well and septic is as well, if there are those things in the property. Radon inspection addendum just says that the radon inspection will be done, and if it's above that threshold that the IEMA says is acceptable, then the buyer asks the seller to take care of that to mitigate the radon. Termite inspection addendum says that the termite inspection will be done within a certain amount of time. If there are termites, the seller needs to take care of that. If the seller agrees to take care of it, the deal is still on. The buyer is still obligated to buy the property if the seller takes care of the termites. The exception being if there is termite damage. Then the buyer can declare the contract null and void. But they can't just declare the contract null and void because of the presence of termites, as long as the seller agrees to treat it. All right, so that's the contract, the inspection addendums. The last things are the seller's disclosure report. So the residential real property disclosure report is a list of 24 questions that the seller has to answer honestly, whether they've lived there within the last 12 months. If not, what is their relationship to the property? And then 23 other questions about the property that they have to disclose anything they know or should have known about, like, do they have flood insurance on the property? Is there flooding? Are there leaks, damage to different things, lots of questions, and they need to explain those things if they are disclosing things. Then there's an excerpt from the actual law on the Residential Real Disclosure Act. Very important document, though. The seller needs to be honest and truthful about anything that they know about with the property. Lead-based paint disclosure is for any property built prior to 1978 where lead-based paint may have been used, and it's just saying whether or not the seller knows of lead-based paint on the property. I don't think I've ever seen a seller say they know there's lead-based paint there, because they would have had to have had an assessment done to find that out. And then below where the buyer says they've acknowledged this, they have received the pamphlet about lead-based paint, so they're educated on it or could self-educate on it. And then they have the opportunity to either do a 10-day risk assessment or waive that opportunity. I've actually never seen someone do one of these lead-based paint risk assessments, but I have found somebody that can do it out of St. Louis. It costs in the $2,000 to $3,000 ballpark for a risk assessment, and it's not an inspection. It's not like, yes, there's lead-based paint, no, there's not lead-based paint. It's really just what is the risk associated with this home. So keep that in mind. Radon disclosure is really the seller's disclosure on whether they know there's radon in the house or not. Most of the time, they say they don't have any knowledge or reports about radon. Very rarely have I seen it where when the seller bought it, they did a radon inspection, and maybe it was just barely over the limit, the 4.0 picocuries per liter limit, and their seller at that time decided to just let it go. In that case, they do need to disclose that it was above and maybe provide those reports, but most of the time when it's high, they ask for it to be repaired and it happens. Most of the time they're saying no, they don't have any knowledge or records of elevated radon. And then the buyer can acknowledge that before. So there are many other additional things that can go along with the contract, like a contingency addendum, an escalation clause, as is addendum, a lot of other things, and about every contract is unique. But what I just covered is the core part of our contract that tends to be in most of the contracts that we see. I covered that in about 18 minutes, and when we do it over the phone, it typically takes 30 to 60 minutes based on questions and discussion. So I hope this is helpful if we weren't able to call and talk or meet in person, so that you're not just blindly signing a contract without understanding what you're actually signing. Thank you, and congratulations.